All right, cool. We'll start with the session today now. For those who are watching on this online, recorded, I'm Ben from the SAY Club, and today with me, I'm also really happy to announce that I'm joined with my fellow SAY team, which is inclusive of Ananya, Christian, and Manit. And also, we're very excited to announce that we have a RMIT alumni joining us today, Desiree Riny. She was a RMIT graduate in 2018 who graduated with first-class honors, and she has done some really cool stuff with service and human design, UCD. And so she's worked on some really cool projects in the honors with the Enable Me, some really cool works with Push and Swivel. But without taking too much time, I'll let her talk a little bit more about what she's done here on this session.
Hi guys, I'm from the graduating class of 2018. A little bit about myself. Love medical field assistive technology. That's kind of my area that I sort of pushed towards once I started graduating. My honors project was basically reclaiming accessibility to lower-limb prosthetics. We essentially use accessible materials in present communities around the world to produce lower limb prosthetics. So a significant problem within that, what I found was, according to the World Health Organization, there's about 40 million amputees living in developing countries. And of those, currently 5% have access to prosthetic limbs and services. And so through this, there's limited access to prosthetic limbs. And so I spent nearly the whole honors sort of collaborating, co-designing with prosthetists and various NGOs to understand this significant problem. After having graduated, I decided to continue on this and develop it into a startup business. I was lucky enough to get represent at RMIT at an iCreate conference. So that's an international convention, I think it's called International Convention on Rehabilitation, Engineering and Assistive Technologies. That was early 2019, where I got to present my academic research there. I was lucky enough to get on 9 News there and continue that. Through that, I made a connection from ThinkPlace. From there, I sort of tried to develop a connection to a community. And we made connection, thankfully, and we're continuing that research at the moment. Also, at the end of sort of 2019, I was lucky enough as well to be shortlisted for a Future Impacted Award in New York City. That was a sort of 3-day accelerator program in New York City, which sort of gave an understanding of how a business runs and the structure of that. Currently, we're partnering with RMIT Activator to help our business side of Enable Me. And also we are currently doing ISO testing with Monash University. Unfortunately, due to the coronavirus, we weren't able to sort of do those testings. And so we've had to sort of take a step back from that. But yes, that's me in a nutshell.
That's very good. Thanks for the introduction. So also just for those who are just joining us in right now, I'd like to reiterate just the same from the last few meetings. We're going to open this for a Q&A. If you'd like to ask a question, feel free to type in the chat or just put a raise hand, and we'll sort of invite you into the space to start a conversation. But just to kick things off, I think I might just start off with a little question on just a bit more about those projects that you've been mentioning and stuff that you've been working currently. I think maybe this is more from an honest point of view. Looking at some stuff that you did, I was actually, good question, probably sort of starting to like, what was the process for you creating the Enable Me prototype? But was there a time where you found yourself also needing to learn like additional skills to develop, the fabrication methods to develop your project?
So in the sense of understanding sort of the practices and processes of making a prosthetic limb, we sort of, well, myself, I connected with a prosthetist to understand those practices and understanding those processes of producing a prosthetic limb. So in terms of, if you got a prototype that you need to understand, you know, soldering or welding, in those processes, you'd reach out to someone that's an expert within that field, that if you don't have that sort of skill, you'd reach out to them. Send them a message over LinkedIn. I was lucky enough, a mate of mine was friends with a prosthetist. Yeah, and so that process looked at saying like, hey, you know, I'm doing this project, I'd be really interested in visiting. Unfortunately, you guys aren't able to do that because of, if you're in honest, because of the coronavirus. But potentially even just having that conversation with them and writing those processes down, or even if they're able to show you online, that was the way of understanding that process.
Yeah, very cool. Nanji, did you want to ask something?
Yep, I had a question. So my question was basically around what was your journey after graduation, and how did you work towards establishing your career?
So after having graduating, you have an end of year exhibition, and that end of year exhibition is, it's not critical or anything like that, but it is an opportunity to present yourself to the industry, because there's a lot of industry people there that night. Good tip, make business cards, publications that you can print off and people can pick up, and stand in front of your project and sort of explain it and share it around Instagram, social media, and you invite industry people over. So if you've collaborated from someone from the Royal Children's Hospital, if you collaborated with, you know, Deloitte Digital, invite those people over, because then that gives you sort of an opportunity to make those connections and potentially bring up, you know, during the recruitment process, or, you know, when you have a graduate position, hey, you know, so-and-so, we did this project, presenting this, we can do those sort of things. Leading towards finishing graduation, I had two choices, essentially go find a job or, you know, turn this into a startup business. Really, I didn't know what I wanted at the start. I had a chat with my honours supervisor, which was Scott Mitchell, and he pretty much said, if you wanted to develop this into a startup, you need to start connecting with people. I think a big thing that I wish I sort of pushed myself to do was connect with more people on LinkedIn. If you're in first year, start that now. That's a very big thing that that helped me to make various connections. If you're available for Design Week, go out and have a chat to people as well, because that's when I made links, and that's where I made a connection through ThinkPlace. When I had the conference in 2019, we made connections there, and so they sort of led to me, you know, making a connection with Cameroon, which is community, but in a progress that is, decided to go look into understanding how a startup is, and that's through RMIT Activator. RMIT Activator is a big community that supports all education departments under RMIT. It's free. You can sign up there. They've got 3 different programs. They're constantly changing it because of due to the coronavirus. So I think I was in the second stage. So there's the first stage is like a basic introduction. The second stage is when you have a proposition and an actual business of an idea, and they sort of support that and connect you with that. And they have a mentor every week with a session. And then you can go into Launch Hub, which is looking to get seeding or funds, which is a temporary loan for you guys. And then you'd pay that after so-and-so years when that's available. So yeah, decided to sign up for RMIT Activator. I was fortunate enough to work there for a couple of months. And that supported myself with being more connected with the community, being a staff member at RMIT University, and still being financially stable. But yeah, unfortunately, coronavirus hits, so I haven't been able to test my prosthetic limbs. I have had to, you know, adjust my positions in certain areas to sort of make up for that.
That sounds pretty intense. Yeah, a good job what you've established, honestly.
So Oh, sorry, no, you go.
Go on, I'm done.
Oh, sure, thanks. So yeah, segueing, I guess, off that startup conversation, what would you say was the hardest part of establishing a startup?
Okay, so things with startups, they're business propositions that have value of a product that is starting to solve a problem. So startups can be sort of, I've got a product, I've got an MVP, I'm ready to introduce this and refine this. So depending on what a startup is, there's different points of where a startup can be. And so in terms of my startup, I had my product. It was ready for essentially user testing and ISO testing. So that's the International Standards Organization. So testing against standards and understanding how to make that safe. So in the sense of establishing a startup, it's more of understanding where you are at with your product. And so a good example is Ryan Tilley. He developed Gecko Tracks. He was very efficient when it came to developing his wheelchair track, if you want to say that. And so he had a business partner, Hoy. So that was his user. And so he was efficient in user testing that with him. Because my target audience is overseas, that's kind of harder to communicate that within 1 year. So depending on how you set up your honors project, and if you want to turn that into a startup, I guess it depends on where your target audience is and how you go about establishing that. So yes, starting a startup, it's pretty much, you have an idea, you have a business proposition, you're solving a problem, and that's pretty much a startup in a box.
Yeah, awesome. I think it's just incredible what you've done. With all of that. I definitely wanted to. I was looking at biomedical engineering at the start of my degree, and I guess that's what led me to industrial design eventually after a couple of years. But yeah, that's your work is really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead. No worry.
Okay, sorry. So I just wanted to build up on that question. So, my team, my studio, like our project just entered, or just won a spot at the RMIT Launch Hub, which will start in November. And so, it's like this whole thing is so, is so new to us, and I'd want to ask, like, would you be familiar with, let's say, like, how long does it take to get to market from, a product to actually something where you start selling stuff?
So, okay, so if you put it from a business perspective, a lot of people want to rush to bringing something to market, and that fails significantly because you don't consider your users. And so if you're always within, the research stage, within the testing stage, with rediscovering those insights and then testing, it depends on what your product is. And now, because mine's a medical product, the process, the business structure of getting that to, say, for example, under the Therapeutic Act in Australian goods can take years. So anyone can develop a startup and anyone can have an idea. It takes guts and grit to keep pushing your idea. And like I said, with the coronavirus, you'll find it, sometimes you just feel like days are not great. You're not getting connections that you want. So I think the best advice I can give you is just be patient and always consider your users. Do not rush through the process, because being an industrial designer, you know what it is. You're all about the user. You're all about user-centered design and understanding the usability of your product. So you've gone into Launch Hub, which is great. You'll have a lot of connections and everything like that. The design side is mostly on your head, whereas RMIT Activator, will support you more on the business side. So going into that, just have a patience with understanding, the testing phase and keep going through that. No matter, like, you hit a road. I've, like, even developing my prosthetic limbs, you're going to hit a road constantly. And so these 3 iterations that I currently have, they're not the final stages of it. I have to refine it. I have to reduce the weight of it, even conducting it underneath ISO testing as well. That's when a instrument machine kind of crushes the prosthetic limb into pieces. And so seeing that into pieces sort of shows you the results of those things. And so it shouldn't discourage you saying, oh no, it didn't withstand the weight. It shows you where those weaknesses are. And so you can work from those points and start to move it towards market.
Thank you. Actually, I think that's quite encouraging, actually, because as you said, it's like, you know, as designers, you want to ensure that the users have the best experience. But I think like in global concepts of startups, it's like the ideas always move super fast. But I think that, I don't know, maybe it's because it's like when you deal with physical products, you have to be a little slower. Would you agree with that?
Again, it depends on what product you are and what stage you're at and how much people are on your team. Like I'm just one person at the moment, working in partnership with people that have skills that I don't have or possess. So like bioengineering, I have no clue of what those skills require. So I'd work with those people to give those results. So you don't always have to constantly don't think about fast pace. Like a big thing in RMIT Activator you'll find is they're very supportive of yourself. They're a great community. They're, don't stress yourself out or think you have to grind every day and have a 24-hour job or anything like that. They're there to support you in understanding that, you know, number one is your audience, your user target audience, and making sure they're the number one priority through that process. And as an industrial designer, you have to say, you know, is this benefiting my users, or am I taking this product away and not developing it? Sometimes you make decisions as well, will have to alter their decisions as well, and you will come to a sort of crossroads. And so you'll make those decisions when that comes. So yeah, don't be too stressed, because yeah, as myself, I was in a point of just making contact with the community in Cameroon, and then the coronavirus hit. So sort of that sort of timeline has sort of stretched out to maybe 3-4 years, depending on how long that process can go. And you might even go through this research, right? And think, okay, go through Launch Hub, potentially get funding, develop the product. Within 2-3 years, you might be profitable, and sometimes you might not be profitable. You might be like, you know what, maybe this service doesn't need to be in place. You might find the physical product more better, or a service might. So it's what's happening at that time, what's happening in that moment is the decisions you make, and that will kind of influence where your company will come to market.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, I got a question. Okay, so looking at Enable Me and the whole idea behind providing this service and this sort of accessibility thing to developing nations and everything, like, what was your inspiration behind it? How did you land on this? How did you identify the space as there's a need, and there should be like something done to rectify it, and basically walking into that unknown space of like us being industrial designers, we not knowing the technical knowledge of mechanical engineering and everything, walking into that unknown without thinking, okay, whether it's going to work out or not. So yeah.
So the biggest inspiration for me was a story that came from an organization. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it was called the Rocky Foundation. There was, I was scrolling through Instagram, and there was a picture there of a mother and a young daughter. And the mother got into an accident, and she wasn't able to get a prosthetic limb for, I think, a year. It wasn't until a year that she got that prosthetic limb, but they had to save money for herself to get that prosthetic limb. And so I thought, okay, that's quite interesting in understanding that process, because I think in Australia, usually a prosthetic limb is covered under the Medicare system, or, you know, NDIS. We have services in place to able for us to gain accessibility to those assistive technologies, right? In communities, in rural communities that are far away from hospitals, can sometimes make you pay a cost. You have to wait for a prosthetic limb to be donated, or some people were like, you know what, I'd rather save the money and build my own prosthetic limb. So people would make prosthetic limbs just for their own benefit because they want to save that money for other importances. So that's when you come into a culture where you have to be, I guess, careful when you're designing and in understand those practices, because obviously I didn't want to design something that took away or brought something in saying like, hey, I designed this thing, now you have to wear this thing. I wanted it to be like, well, what are the practices they're using? What is their cultural practice? What is their understanding of those things? And how can you meet medical standards and those cultural practices in one? And so I thought maybe if I use their existing materials that are local to them, and I thought, okay, bikes are a common form of transport across many different nations around the world. And a lot of it's quite universal components. And so I loved bikes when I was a kid. And so that inspiration drawed, and those two bridges kind of crossed. Now, obviously me being in Melbourne, you can only make so many decisions until when you're in that environment, you start to change those considerations. And so that was my plan, was to develop this prosthetic limb, because you only have a year to design a project. And usually when you're designing a product, it takes more than a year, especially a medical product, which I have found, unless you have a user, like unless if I was friends with an amputee, I could and ask them, and if I was like, hey, we can do this safely, then you might be able to spread the process up. But when you start to develop something that's under a lot of regulation, you have to make sure it's critical to a point that it's safe. And so that's what led up to that understanding. So I think for the year I was like, I could understand these practices through tangible photographs, speaking to communities and NGOs and understand it from their perspective as well. So getting people from the ground and understanding what those environments were and what those cultural practices were, and influence those within the design. So I wasn't just making up assumptions, I was basing those off hard evidence of the photographs that were placed in those communities. So Flickr is a great resource to use because people just take photographs around the world and sometimes they geoloc tag it. So then that's based where you can find where an organization is or an NGO, and looking at those photographs, you can find evidence of, people using plastic bottles for different, purposes than what we would use a jerry can for. And sometimes they would reverse engineer bikes to create different alternatives, which was amazing because I thought if they're capable of making these products, then if we gave them a manual that allowed them to transcribe those into more valuable products, then why isn't that something that we have currently? Another influence was also amputees. Well, I can't really speak on behalf of amputees, but from the stories that I've been told and the stories that I've read online, it's, you get this prosthetic limb, you go to someone and they make this prosthetic limb for you, and it's kind of like, it's not a part of them in some sense, because they sometimes don't have control of, what socket they get or the comfort sometimes, depending on the budget of the, the resources that they've been provided. So if you're in a rural community, your limitation is quite limited in what assistive technologies you get. Whereas in Australia, you could get access to, a socket lining, a silicone, there's all these different type of materials. And, sometimes you're available to have, this cool art decorative piece and cover as well to make it sort of look like you. So I wanted to allow people to have a little bit more control over their prosthetic limb as well, because also in cultural practices as well, sometimes going to someone and getting help from someone can be a burden to them, and sort of allowing them to have some control over it, you're bringing sort of dignity back to them and allowing them to have control over what happened to them. So yeah, there's various bridges of why I came to that sort of conclusion of developing prosthetic limbs. Sorry.
No, that's great, because I'm an international student. I'm from India, and I've firsthand seen people with disabilities just living with it because they can't get treated because they don't have the money to get treated, because they don't have the contacts to get treated and everything. And I think it's really noble that you're doing something in that space, and it's really inspiring as well. Because I'm interested in humanitarian design as well. I want to like look forward to something like solving some wicked problem or like something like that. But I think it's really noble, and kudos to you for the project and everything.
Thank you.
All right.
I also want to add, I think you nailed an insight there, because I actually had an injury like several years back. So I broke my leg, and then that feeling of helplessness is part of the downward spiral. So I think having some control over making yourself more powerful, I think that's very valuable, definitely.
I ask a question? Yeah, first of all, I'm like really amazed and inspired with your story. I just wanted to ask, like, this is kind of pivoting away from your project and more about like how you are as a person. I think it must be really kind of scary to going into like entrepreneurship and startups, and also being like a single person like group. I was just wondering, how do you keep like your spirit and like your enthusiasm for your project? Like it must not be like there every single day.
To completely honest, like being a single person on developing something that's bigger than you, like especially problems like 40 million amputees, only 5% have access with that statistic. You feel like there's some sort of, as an industrial designer, on one hand, you have this responsibility, you need to solve problems that are big and so on and so forth. But then also at the same time, it's an opportunity to help someone. And so I think in terms of motivation, I love solving problems, but I think big thing that I was drawn to is the medical field of design and understanding those technologies and how those enable people. And so part of that motivation comes from understanding those design practices and being able to, understanding the mechanics, the biomechanics. So I think that's part of my passion and my motivation to try to continue it and push it despite the coronavirus or any other obstacles that come past. And then on the other hand, the motivation is the goal at the end. If I'm able to allow even just one person to walk or, change the conversation around a big thing. Okay, actually, another advice is something that I learned going into entrepreneurship is sometimes even the end goal can change. So say, for example, I want a prosthetic limb on an amputee, right? Sometimes that might not even be the end goal. The end goal potentially could be changing the conversation around prosthetic limbs and how a community can get access to that. So even just by changing the conversation around that, I've created that impact there, and more people start to get into that space, and others can use that design in ways to build onto those new designs or new technologies that are available, essentially. So I think the motivation comes from the impact that I can create. But also at the same time, I'm learning to understand that sometimes things don't turn out, and that's completely fine. And it's okay to have days where, you just don't feel like doing things, and that's fine. You can take days and just repivot. Also at the same time, it's important to keep the lights on at the end of the day as well. So if you're going to develop a startup, it needs to be profitable, and that's something I'm learning as well. It's quite difficult to develop a D.I.Y prosthetic limb, to find a business structure that fits around that, and I'm still learning and understanding it, just like yourself. So I think my best advice is, if you're able to change the conversation around a problem and bring attention to that, then that should be your motivation to keep pushing forward.
Right, thank you.
Might just jump in for the next question here as well. I think also just jumping back into conversation about entrepreneurship and startups, you sort of mentioned it, but what are some strategies or just general things that you've learned or tips you could share about expanding your connections? So like you mentioned, so finding more people on LinkedIn, or maybe just going to industry leading events, what are some things you could sort of expand into that?
So my start of my goal was to find a connection with the community. Obviously, I didn't know how to do that. I wasn't sure how to do that. So I thought maybe the best opportunity is to apply to potentially design competitions that allow you to have connections to those communities. So the iCreate conference in 2019, earlier, I think September or August, that had an opportunity for rehabilitation. That had connections to a lot of people within that field. And one, it's not only for my honors or startup community or project, it was a connection as well into the industry itself. So potentially if this startup wasn't successful or couldn't continue, I had those connections which were in those industries where I could say, hey, I'm an industrial designer. I end up doing this. I would love to work for your company. I understood that we met through these connections. So best thing is design competitions. Try to get into publications if possible. It's not the most important thing to win those design competitions as well. Just getting into that and having an objective to be exposed to that community and put you in the highlight of, that space is really great. Design Week is a great opportunity for you guys to connect with industry people, especially in Melbourne, because it's a Melbourne-based community. Some people I think come internationally. I'm not entirely sure, but there's really great presentations on about different designs that are available and different topics that guys might be interested in. You can have sort of a chat with them at the end of the day. Conferences, RMIT Activate as well is a great little space for you guys to be open to people with business structures as well. I think when I signed up, it was very it just started picking up. I didn't see much designers through it, but then I think over 2018 to 2020, a lot more people from the industrial design department are coming into the into the activator space, which I'm really happy about. And that was something what their objective was, is to bring more design people with business people, because that's how great startups work significantly. But yeah, check out the RMIT activator space. There's also Swinburne University and the Generator. I can't remember what the Swinburne University has a department that's in, I think it's called the Design Factory as well. Not only RMIT has available space in those areas where you can get exposed. Yeah, Swinburne University, even going to different exhibitions as well. Final year exhibitions, even when you graduated, it's a great opportunity to connect with people. And I've made mates now in Swinburne University, and so that gives me an opportunity to understand what is available there, or so yeah, I think they're the sort of things off the top of my head that can create connections and networks.
Yeah, I got a question. What's been sort of like an average day in the life, with your design work? Probably, I guess it would have been a lot different with COVID, but I guess maybe when things before the pandemic, what was a day in the life of your design work?
So the day. So yeah, it depends on what I was doing. So the average day would look like me working at nighttime and putting more effort towards my prosthetic limbs during the day. So that's either having video calls, getting connections to them, tracking down people that I can have a chat to, entering design competitions, going to people's offices to have a chat to them, using RMIT's facilities, because through RMIT Activator, they will allow you to have access again, but it depends on what you're doing at that point. So yeah, using RMIT's facilities to understand, where I can do ISO testing, checking out the labs. They have a great engineering department. It's not as sophisticated as Swinburne or Monash University, so it's also seeking out other connections through that. So Monash is, if you're into design, Christian, if you're into design or going into the medical field or anything like that, check out Miami, Monash Young Med Tech something. It's on my bio on LinkedIn.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're a really great community. They when you have an abstract, they bring students on to help you out. with your project. So if it's something that's you know, you're on your own and you need help, they can help you within those connections as well. So yeah, it was just the day-to-day life was it was different every day. So it was just, you know, work at night, whenever I had a shift at RMIT Activator, try to do freelancing as well, through Fiverr some days as well. And then
So you were on Fiverr doing different stuff.
Yes.
Cool.
Towards the end of like 2019, when I tried to start, or 2019, 2020 is when I tried to start looking into Fiverr. It is a competitive. I only got like one message out of like within 3 months. But if you're able to connect with people on LinkedIn and asking, just continue to connect, you're able to sometimes freelance, but it really depends. And
Yeah, well, thanks, Eve. I'll definitely check out that I'll have to catch you on LinkedIn so I can find out more about that.
So I'd like to ask, you mentioned, I'd like to ask, how do you think the design communities at RMIT, Swinburne, and Monash compare with each other?
To be honest, industrial design is such a massive field, and you'd be very surprised how interconnected they are. You know, I think I got onto Core 77. That was when I got my first publication on my prosthetic limb, and someone from Swinburne University was like, "Hey, my mate saw your publication," and I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "You got on Core 77." I was like, "No, I didn't." And he was the first one to find out. So I was like, how is that even possible? And so, yeah, they're very intermingled. Like, I went to a final year exhibition last year as well, and I saw Scott Mason, Frank. I saw a lot of design teachers there. So the community is very big, and you'd be very surprised of how open they are. And if you ask for help, they're more than happy to help you with anything that you need. So don't be afraid. It is terrifying. I did meet one of my biggest inspirations for one of the biggest companies that I would like to work for, and he was amazing. He was open to wanting to help me out and giving me advice. So yeah, just be open. Don't be afraid. Just ask for help, and when you need help, they're more likely to help you out.
Thank you. Sorry, to follow up with that, how about also like, how do you think their experiences are compared to ours at RMIT? Like, I mean, would you say that certain schools are better at certain things than the others?
Not necessarily. I think each design course is the same in its own form. So some do internships, some don't. I know Swinburne University allows you to do your honors project internationally or an existing. So there's 3 streams that you can go into. There's do your own. One is, I think they let you do something overseas, and then they have already a current project set up, and you can come on board and do it. I'm not too familiar with Monash. I did have a mate there. I think it's quite similar to RMIT's. And RMIT's is like, you decide of how to conduct your honors project. With the different communities and different spaces, I guess Monash University has more access to ISO testing and testing products. RMIT University, in the sense of testing medical products, it might be significantly reduced because obviously we're more tech-based, and I think we have labs for like microorganisms. So it depends on like what facilities and what universities specialize in what. I think it's the same that goes for like Melbourne University as well. Like if you compare Melbourne to RMIT in architecture, they have different ways of teaching and different ways in which you can get into the industry, but they both cover the same principles that you need to get into the industry. So I wouldn't say one's better than the other. It's just they all have open connections, and they all have availability to teach you the skills that you need to go into industry. But I suggest to continue to interconnect those with having a chat to other people within those communities as well, because you will learn something from that. And I think, you know, a good example is when I volunteered for Tom Global, which is Assistive Technologies. It's a maker space. I got to meet people from Swinburne University, and they, you know, taught me things that I didn't know much about. And that's them themselves of understanding those and them going through experiences that were different from me. So it's like, again, I might have some experience in understanding a startup within assistive technologies, whereas someone else might have taken a different route in furniture design, and I maybe not, you know, say for example, I might not be familiar with a certain tool. They would come along and be like, hey, I've got this cool tool, and they teach me how to do those things. So it's not necessarily about saying, yeah, RMIT is better and Monash is better. It's just about how their community is set up and how open they are. So if you have an opportunity to go down to their campus or have a chat to a professor that is in industrial design, go and have a chat to them, and understand what they have and what experiences are available there.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I have a question. So like, as you talked about, connecting with people on LinkedIn, networking events and everything, design week and whatnot. Once you've connected and like going for an internship and everything, asking for experience or volunteering for them as well, how do you go out and ask something like that, apart from just like striking up a conversation and everything, just coming up across as like any other uni student who's like trying to network and everything? How do you stand out in that? What do you think?
So you guys are all in a very unique position. You're all students. So when you're students, they're more likely to, you know, be like, oh, you're doing a project. I'd love to get a bit of your time and have a chat. So being a student is an advantage. And you don't have to stand out from other people. If you have experiences or you're genuinely interested in, say, for example, you're in honors, you find an abstract or a thesis that's really cool and you want to know about, contact the author and they'll be more than happy to have a chat with you about what they've done and what you're doing, because it's about your passion and understanding their, you know, skills that they have. And so most of the time, if you're genuinely passionate about what they're doing, they're most likely going to have a conversation with you, or you can have a coffee with them. You can be like, hey, love to sit down with you 5 minutes and have a coffee with you. If you're able to make it more open for them as well, if it's a Zoom call or a coffee or just a quick chat, and be open to how they would like to introduce themselves. I think that's my biggest advice. Is sometimes, yeah, some people get short on time and they can only do Zoom meetings. Even if it's just a quick Zoom meeting, it's worth your time just getting that little bit of information and understanding those things. But yeah, I think, yeah, don't be too pressured of you have to stand out and have bright cut lights and sparkly colors. I think it's about just your passion and just being a genuinely nice person and just being empathetic towards their schedule and their availability. And trust me, like I said, one of my biggest inspirations, I wanted to have a chat with him. I had the opportunity to have a phone call with him. Even when it was a phone call, it was great. Now I have that connection, and, you know, I learned things through that, and that advice brought me more knowledge, you know, through my startup. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask. Just send a LinkedIn and be like, hey, you know, I read this article, it was really cool. I'd love to catch up for coffee. Sometimes you won't get a reply back. Don't let that discourage you either, because you're going to have a lot of knockdowns. And I had numerous opportunities throughout the year, and you got to make choices. The one, either you do a job or you go to New York City and go to the accelerator program. Like, I had opportunities to do things, and I'm learning not to regret those decisions either, because they also bring you experiences at that time as well. So yep. Even when you don't get a reply back, at least in yourself, you can say, I had the courage to message someone. And even though they didn't reply back, that's just a learning experience for myself next time, to be like, okay, maybe just a few short words instead of a long paragraph. So you learn as you go along, and just, don't be afraid to ask for help.
All right. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Just looking into the future, like where do you see your business like in like a few years? Like, or like a better question is like, how far are you looking into? You know, like which cut line have you already looked into?
If you told me that last year, I'd probably be like, you know, I'm not going to New York. Like the possibilities are like quite, like you can, so a good example in industrial design is you can go and go outside and plan your day as much as you want, but you'll find there will be a massive line or there will be bumps in that road when you try to plan something. So when I see myself in 10 years time, I think I'm just learning as understanding, it'd be nice to have a job and be in the industry. In terms of my startup, if there was a chance of me further developing that and getting, money from that and being financially stable through that, I'd see it as, connecting with different communities around the world, potentially with the Red Cross and different NGO organizations, and developing all sorts of different assistive technologies if that opportunity presents itself. And that's how I see myself.
All right, I will just jump in and also just look into some of the other questions here. I think another thing could be quite curious to sort of learn more is I think you've sort of mentioned earlier about your sort of journey into learning like, okay, I want to sort of work into prosthetics, but do you have any general advice or tips for us as I guess industrial design students going forward to discover what exactly we're passionate for? Like what exactly we should be going in terms of this broader spectrum of industrial design?
Some advice that I got at the start of developing my startup was don't put yourself in a box. I'm all for assistive technologies, but there might be opportunities where that might not happen until further down the year, because obviously I am just starting out and a lot of assistive technology companies require experience. And so in terms of getting passionate about something, I think just be open to opportunities. And that's something that I need to give that advice to myself as well. I need to take that advice, because you can be very passionate about assistive technologies, but you'll find that Melbourne is very limited in certain companies in assistive technologies. So that kind of puts you in a box. So it's like, what do you do now, right? So I think in terms of finding your passion, advice that I got from an awesome person, anyone know Gary Vee? Gary Vee is a great entrepreneur. He's a good advice provider as well. And something that I heard was someone was like, I tried all these different things, but I don't know what I'm passionate about. And his advice was try as many things as possible now and take all those opportunities and risks if you're living with your parents, or if you're not living with your parents, or if you're in a community that's safe to do those things and you're financially stable, try as many opportunities. So volunteer for the things that you like. Try a startup. If it fails, at least you can say, I tried it and it gave me that experience and those connections. So for finding something passionate about something, you can only do that through doing things and understanding those things. And so a good example is myself. The coronavirus, I'm not able to do those tests, ISO testing. I'm not able to go to RMIT University and have a chat to someone about my prosthetic limbs. I'm more than capable of doing research over the phone and Zoom meetings. So it's like, okay, then what's my next opportunity? What are you good at? How do you put those things into a career? Furniture design or welding. It might be just, a process that you enjoy, or, community-aided design. You like technology and understanding those things. So you might go into generative design. Industrial design is such a massive field that sometimes it can be overwhelming in understanding what you want to do. And if you feel overwhelmed, that's okay, because it is a feeling that I've understood that a lot of people still feel now. And I still feel that sometimes as well. It's like, well, maybe I should have taken that opportunity to get that job at the start of the year. I'd be employed by now and then I wouldn't have to do those things, right? but then I can say, well, if I didn't take the opportunity to do my startup, I wouldn't have gone to my first, overseas international trip to New York City. I wouldn't have met people in New York. If I didn't do the conference in Canberra, I wouldn't have met, one of my best mates that lives in Japan now. It just comes down to just trying as many things as you can and just understanding, maybe give it yourself maybe a couple months. If it's not something that you enjoy, then just move on. And don't have to be afraid to move on as well. You have moments where, or a long time, a period of time where you're at a standstill and you might not be able to find a job in the industry. So that's me at this point at the moment. I was able to get a job at RMIT Activator. I wasn't able to get a job in design, but I was able to develop a startup that allowed me to understand and further my skills and practices in assistive technologies. Then that furthered to me allowed to volunteer to other places. And then that opened more doors and more doors. So it's just, if you can't get somewhere, try the back door of something. And yeah.
Is that Gary Vaynerchuk, I think?
Yeah, Gary V.
Yeah, he's great on podcasts. You listen to him for like 10 minutes. How to get rich? He definitely really gets you motivated. And yeah, he's really successful himself. So.
Yeah, very fantastic words. Also, I'd just like to remind everyone that we're also just coming up to the end of the session. If anyone has any quick questions they'd like to bring up, do so now. But if there isn't any more questions, I might just ask one last question from you, Desiree. I think just to sum up this whole webinar, do you have any advice or just general tips, be it anything that you've learned throughout your entire career in industrial design that you'd like to share with our students?
I wish that I had someone that I knew had graduated before I entered honors and asked several questions. So I guess I might have someone on the top of my head at the moment, but you guys do know someone, and other people that are like Ryan Tilley. Reach out to those people and ask those questions. If you're feeling unfamiliar or something, a great tips as well is reach out to people. Start a LinkedIn now, and start making those connections, and don't be afraid to get coffee with someone. Something I really wish in, when I was a student was the access to all the different programs that are free and you don't have to pay thousands of dollars for. Have the access to those is amazing. So try and practice advanced CAD learning those different programs and having access to those. Learn them now. Take as much time, even though if you might be unfamiliar with it, just have a go. If it's not something, then it's all right. A good resource, Render Weekly. If you want to be motivated during this period of time, Render Weekly is kind of an awesome, they've got challenges every week to do CAD. So that's something that's quite cool. These sort of things didn't pop up until I started graduating. A good, awesome book is Research for Designers, A Guide to Methods and Practices. Great book for understanding how to set up a thesis in honors. And abstract that gives you the processes of actually structuring something. Reaching out to communities as well that you want to go into those spaces with. So if it's something that you're interested into doing, so if it's assistive technologies, go into a community or have a chat to an amputee or have a chat to the people with those needs and see what those problems are and what available jobs are out there. So if it's humanitarian design, Engineers Without Borders, RMIT is really great affiliation with them. And they provide sometimes projects that you can do. So if you want to do a live project during honors, I don't know if you could set up with them, but have a chat to them and be like, hey, is there a project that I can do for my honors that allows me to travel, but also turn it into a product, that I can continue on after when I graduate? I don't know too many off the top of my head, but yeah, I think the top 5 advice is reach out to people, don't be afraid, reach out to previous graduates, get their advice, don't be too hard on yourself as well. There's times where you feel like, you know, you're just having a really rough day and everything's not working out. I can tell you it will work out, and you'll be surprised with the results. You can plan as much as you want, but sometimes that plan won't go according to plan, and it's okay if you have a few bumps. And the fifth one is drink, eat, and sleep, guys. Industrial design is a crazy field, and sometimes, you know, we have our days where we do all-nighters and everything like that. You know, it's important to look after your health, and especially during this time, your mental health. So don't be too tough on yourself in terms of not be able to understand something or not be able to communicate with your lecturer. They're probably having a tough time too. I have a mate that's just become a teacher, and you can imagine she's just, you know, started and now she has to deal with this online stuff, and it's hard, you know. So look after yourself, drink water, stay hydrated, and if you need to skip a class to do something, sometimes that's also okay as well. Don't say that's from me. But yeah, everyone's understanding in all those things. So yeah, I think that's my last advice. Just look after yourself.
Thanks so much for those words, Desiree. I think that's truly inspiring for many of us. But yeah, I think just lastly, just to finish it off, thank you so much for spending the time with us. I can definitely stress it that, like what Desiree was mentioning, you know, sort of contacting past graduates, Desiree, along with the other students that sort of attended this whole series, I mean, they've been so helpful. They've really dedicated so much of the time just to answer our questions. Like, you know, this is what we kind of do here. But yeah, I think before we sort of finish up as well, Desiree, would you like to share any of your links or social media that we could sort of follow up and see your progress, or even maybe get in touch?
I've got a YouTube channel. It's my first name, last name. It's on the little box that's highlighting. Then it's Riny Designs, Riny Designs, Instagram, website, DesireeRiny.com. It's pretty straightforward. If you just look up my first name and last name, everything will pop up on Google, just about. If you want to learn more or hear more, or if you just want to reach out, or if you want to work on my projects, I am looking for people and skills within my prosthetic limbs, or if you know someone that is open to prosthetic limbs, I'm more than happy to have a chat. You can just email me through my website. Also, another good social, RMIT University, I think it's Industrial Design Community on Facebook. I'm also there as well. A lot of other previous graduates are there as well. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, perfect. All right, thanks so much, Desiree. We'll also share those links and also just this whole recordings and stuff onto an email so you can find out more there.
Yeah, sweet.
All right, thanks again, everyone, for coming by, and also Desiree.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll finish up from here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.